imagine it will still be Richard Scott, the man that they have to chase. And the chasing, we imagine, will be done by several riders behind them. Brent Jones on the TZ750, number 1 there. Here's Richard Scott, letter A, coming in. Huntspeaker Herman, letter H, at the back of them. This front row is where the action will come from, though. Craig Trinder, Gary Goodfellow, Richard Scott, Robert Holden. We can expect challenges on Richard Scott very early on from any of those, trying to get out to a good start and put a little bit of a gap between themselves and Richard Scott, whom they know will be coming from behind and most likely will pass them. 15 laps, as have been all the races today. The grid is clear. They've got a start. They haven't got a start. The grid was clear, and 1 or 2 crept up just before the flag dropped. Often by sitting back, they can get a bit of a run at the start. That's a lot of judgment. Richard Scott that's a good start from him. Being passed by a couple of the production-based bikes, as you would expect, the super bikes. Craig Trinder into the first corner again. First up, Robert Holden right behind him. Have a look as they sort themselves out. Gary Goodfellow, Bob Toomey up there. Craig Trinder behind him. Robert Holden. Then Brian Morrison in 5th place. There they are, Gary Goodfellow leads them around. Scotty got a good start that time. He didn't get pushed too far back at all. It's going to take him a little while to pick some of these guys off as they use fairly wide lines on the initial laps. Still won't have the tyres fully warm yet. Gary Goodfellow, Craig Trinder, Bob Toomey, Robert Holden is the order. Gary Goodfellow still with that broken finger, having some trouble with his clutch hand. Craig Trinder behind him. Bob Toomey hanging in there in 3rd place, doing well. Robert Holden right behind him. Robert Holden has a slick on the front and the rear this time, rather than the slick on the rear and the treaded tyre on the front. That should enhance his chances. Certainly it makes him a lot more stable around the big sweeping corner as they come on to the front straight. These fellas just entering that sweeper now. Goodfellow first in, riding for all he's worth. He wants the points, and he knows that the only way he's got a chance is by building up this lead at the start. But already Richard Scott starting to come through, up to 3rd place. Probably looking at 2nd at the end of the straight here. No, he hops back into 3rd again behind Craig Trinder. And Bob Toomey making things difficult for him there as well. Goodfellow pulling away with this lead just a little. Richard Scott up to 2nd now. And it won't be terribly long, I imagine, before Richard Scott, having got clear of the rest of the field, will close this gap between himself and Gary Goodfellow. Trinder still 3rd, then Toomey, then Holden. Brent Jones behind them, and then Brian Morrison and Steve Trinder.
This is an absolute flyer of a start from Gary Goodfellow. He likes to do that, get away quickly at the start and just go as hard as he can just to get clear of that bunch, settle himself into a routine. This is the same bike that he's used on the AMA and the Canadian local circuit. He was top privateer in the States this year and won the Canadian Formula 1 Championship on this self-same bike.
He's riding this bike a great deal harder than Richard Scott is riding his at the moment. You'll see that when he gets under brakes and the wheels chatter on him.
Of course, this circuit tends to suit the GP bikes a little bit better, Tony. The bike that Gary's riding is production-based. 4-stroke as opposed to Richard's 2-stroke, and it's probably giving something away and something in the vicinity of 50 or 60 kilograms in weight to Richard Scott's bike.
Goodfellow still holding on to that lead. Richard Scott getting closer and closer each lap now. We imagine on the next lap around he may be able to do it in a straight line, where theoretically he is quicker, but this bike of Gary Goodfellow's is very, very fast in a straight line. I think even Richard Scott was amazed at how fast it was in a straight line. Robert Holden has moved up to 4th place behind Craig Trinder. There's Goodfellow, there's Scott, looking back now, Craig Trinder, Robert Holden right on his tail. This could be a good race because I know Robert Holden sees his opposition in this race as Craig Trinder. Realistically, he's not in the hunt for Richard Scott on a production bike simply with some slicks bolted on. That's going to be a good race if they stay in third and fourth places. But here's the front runners, Gary Goodfellow and Richard Scott, not having got past him yet. Craig Trinder, Robert Holden. Holden trying to go around the outside. Trinder's got the middle line. The front two go through, Trinder and Robert Holden. We'll have a look just a little further back in the field. There's the front two. There's Craig Trinder and Robert Holden, third and fourth. Then Brent Jones, Bob Toomey, Steve Trinder, Paul Pavletich, and then Brian Morrison. This is Brent Jones, leading Bob Toomey, Steve Trinder, Paul Pavletich, Brian Morrison. But here are the leaders, and Richard Scott has got into the lead from Gary Goodfellow. Taking a wider line at that hairpin, but having to drive out of the corner. Now that he's got to the front, his only thing to contend with now is the traffic as they get a few laps more under their belt. And I think the only chance that Gary Goodfellow is going to have again of getting close to Richard Scott is when they get into some traffic. Scott, having got clear of them now, bided his time for a little while, will only go as fast as he has to stay in front. And if that sounds like it's a comfortable cruise, it certainly isn't. Intense concentration required for Richard Scott to ride this bike at this kind of speed. Even if it is a cruise comparatively, he's still living on a knife edge. And somebody's down because we have yellow flags out, and this may be a chance for Gary Goodfellow to get a little closer. Robert Holden has got up to third place. Can't see any obstruction on the track, so whatever it was may well have been cleared as Richard Scott carries on in the lead. Gary Goodfellow still chasing him. Robert Holden has got up to third place in front of Craig Trinder. Richard Scott taking very tidy lines. And it was Paul Pavletich on the Ciba-Geigy bike, the RG500, which they've had some problems with. He's been riding the tail off it, trying to make it competitive. I imagine that Paul Pav is all right, one of New Zealand's better known and very popular riders. He doesn't like being on an uncompetitive bike. That's quite understandable. Just sweeping off the circuit there with a bit of cement to try and get rid of what oil has been spilt.
Robert Holden is starting to make a bit of a move on Gary Goodfellow here. These two are campaigners back in Canada in '84. Gary didn't do too much riding due to injury, but when they got together on the track, they were dynamite. If you notice Gary, when he comes down to the hairpin here, he tends to take a fairly narrow line. Scotty chooses the outside line, but Gary goes in fairly shallow and comes across the bumps there. It tends to shake the front end of the bike around a fair bit and limits the drive that he's got coming out of the corner there. He's still got to get it under control. Robert's line tends to be a lot wider. The production bike does need those slightly wider lines due to just its weight and just the general way that it handles.
But I imagine that if there's any psychological advantage here to Robert, it is that he knows Gary Goodfellow is in some pain and having trouble using the clutch on his bike because of that broken finger in a splint.
This ride of Gary's just demonstrates his gutsy determination, though, Tony. He's a real hard charger, always has been when he was riding motocross, and certainly learned a lot on his expeditions around the AMA circuit there. And he's not going to give Robert anything extra that he doesn't have to. Coming up to lap traffic here, this could give Robert a bit of an advantage from the backside there. But
Gary Goodfellow, you may just catch a glimpse there of his hand on the left-hand side, the one that operates his clutch. He's got a splint on his finger over the top of his glove. So he's only able to use a couple of fingers to pull in the clutch to get a start. And for most of the race, he's riding the bike without using the clutch, which tends to wear things out a little bit, but it'll get him to the end of the race. But this is a superb ride from Robert Holden, challenging now for third place.
Robert's looking for as much slipstream that he can get down the front straight here. The power of the 750 is quite superior, and he's making up a lot of his ground under brakes and through the windy, twisty section at the back of the circuit. Look, he's closed right up on the Goodfellow under brakes here, and he'll stick as close as he can just to try and get some advantage. Maybe just tuck a wheel up under the inside, coming into this next left-hander. Just keeping as close to the tail as he can.
Gary Goodfellow's not going to like this. He really is a very tough competitor. He knows Holden's there. This race is actually for second place. There's no question that Richard Scott is going to continue to hold that first place, but this dice for second is very, very exciting when you consider what machinery is in this race. For Robert Holden to be out there on a production bike and simply have put slicks on it, to be this close to the leaders. There's Richard Scott, the race leader, and this is how close they are behind him. Gary Goodfellow still desperately holding that second place, but Robert Holden just climbing all over him. And I'm sure tactics like this will eventually wear Gary Goodfellow down.
Holden looking for the inside line there, but Gary took that away from him quite firmly.
Just a question of who makes a mistake first when they're this close, because the tiniest of mistakes or a missed gear change is always on the cards when you're not using the clutch. And that will be it in terms of the order. It's where the race is being run, though. Second and third places.
And look now here for the speed advantage this little 750's got over the 1100, which is basically a standard 1100 Suzuki, which is just
see if we can get a look at that again, Joanne. A little bit of bodily contact there. Not unheard of in racing, and quite interesting to watch. Just have a look at it. As they came in here, Gary Goodfellow not giving away an inch. They got into the next bit. Just have a look. You'll see a little bit of contact there, just a wee elbow. And Robert Holden's hand coming out saying, come on, sunshine, move over. Great dice, though. Second and third places. White flag is not far away from coming out for the last lap for Richard Scott. The white flag out this time around. Richard Scott has been shown it.
Robert Holden has the advantage coming down the front straight here, but Gary's certainly trying to use the power advantage of the 750 to get back in front.
What a gutsy ride from Gary Goodfellow, carrying an injury of a broken finger. With severe bruising on that and the next finger. Richard Scott is going to win the race, but this is a great dice for second place. Can Robert Holden get this production bike wound up and himself wound up enough to do it in this last little piece of the circuit? Oh, he did it. Well, he sucked Gary Goodfellow in then and really left him with nowhere to go. Super racing, and on the last lap, around the sweeper for the last time, and onto the straight, and Robert Holden is in second place in the sprint down to the line. Look at Scotty. Richard Scott winning it by the narrowest of margins. Robert Holden closing on him in second place, takes second, and Gary Goodfellow back to third. What a super race. And Richard Scott just getting off the gas a little in the latter stages of that race, knowing what protection he had in the way of a lead and a cushion from the rest of the field. He almost got off the gas just a little too much as they were catching him, but have a look at this.
Just choosing the inside line, just shows Gary a wheel just in the inside there.
And then zaps right up the inside, and have a look at where Gary Goodfellow ends up, because this is a battle of nerves. And as they come into the next picture there, you'll see Gary Goodfellow is too wide to get that corner, has to back off, go behind Robert Holden, and then fold it under. There's just no way he could get round the corner on the line that he was forced out to. And it was a little bit of contact racing, shall we say, but Gary Goodfellow started it first, and Robert Holden said, well, if you want to play that game, I can play it too. So he managed to get Gary Goodfellow to back off just enough to save his skin and get on a line to get him around the next corner. And then through the sweeper, Gary Goodfellow absolutely determined, just drifting that bike. And have a look at Richard Scott pulling a big wheelie out in front, onto the front straight. And Robert Holden out to the left of your picture, and Gary Goodfellow right behind him. Richard Scott knew that he had it just in the space of a bike length, wins the series, wins the race. Robert Holden in second place and Gary Goodfellow third. What a race.
A race worthy of the title of New Zealand Grand Prix, and here is the winner, Richard Scott. Yet again, this is getting to be a habit, Richard, but in the end, a little bit closer than usual on the finish line.
Yeah, I was sort of playing around a bit, and Robert snuck up on us.
It was actually a hell of a dice going on for second and third, but I guess you never saw too much of that.
No, I thought there was something going on there, but I didn't know what.
Well, Richard, you've proved yourself completely dominant during this series in Formula One. Tell us now about your plans for 1987. Rumours about you joining the Elf team to get in the World Championship in 500cc and mixing it with the likes of Kenny Roberts and Eddie Lawson and co.
Well, that's, you know, I'm trying to get to the Grand Prix scene. With Elf, it's all happening, but we're not quite sure yet. I should know in the next week or two.
And if you did get into 500cc Grand Prix, would it be on this machine or another one?
A similar type of machine to this, probably not this one.
All right, Richard Scott, well done. Don Cosford's got the trophy for you. Congratulations, New Zealand Grand Prix winner for 1987, Richard Scott and his Honda RS 500. And something to wet the whistle afterwards, Richard. I wonder if we can just get a quick word with these two guys who've been dicing for second and third. Gary Goodfellow, in the end you had to concede, but I guess it must have been a fairly painful sort of ride.
It wasn't going really that comfortable for me. Robert has been chasing me all weekend. Actually, the whole series he's been right there, riding extremely well. And yeah, we got into a bit of a bumping match over there in the tight section, and it was good fun.
All right, Gary, good to have you back in your home country again. You back next year, back next summer?
I hope so. Hope to be back.
All right, thanks very much.
Better and faster bike.
Maybe something like this, perhaps?
Maybe.
All right, Gary Goodfellow, good on you. Now, perhaps a word from the real star of that race, Robert Holden over here on his production bike, the 1100 Suzuki, but the slicks on front and rear, Robert, really increased the speed, I guess.
Yeah, it's the first time I've tried slicks front and rear, and it took me a couple of laps to get going, but then when I got going, Craig Trinder's bike was quite a bit faster than mine, plus Gary's was. The faster I went down the straight, the more pissed off I got around the corners, and I just tried harder and harder and harder and managed to make enough room up over there on the last lap. It was a bit of a do-or-die manoeuvre, but Gary's bumped into me a few times, I bumped into him. There's no love lost. It's pretty good fun.
Nevertheless, a fairly successful day for you here at Ruapuna with Suzuki Masters and senior production and everything.
Oh yeah, I'm pleased. You buy one bike and you can do like 6-8 races a day, you know, and you can have really good finishes in all of them. I'm really pleased.
Hang on, I think we're in trouble here, Robert, as the champagne begins to flow. Good on you, Scotty. Well done. Uh-oh. It's going to be a dry cleaning bill sent to Richard Scott after this. There it is from Ruapuna, perhaps Tony Palmer. Tony Palmer now has the final points from the various classes.
Thanks, Peter. Looks like you're getting a bit wet over there. Let's just have a look at what the final standings were. Richard Scott on 85, Robert Holden on 54, taking second place overall, and Craig Trinder with 53. So Robert Holden in second place by just...